Hear from a disabled Londoner trying to make ends meet who says he's being failed by the universal credit system. But first, as things stand, the minimum income requirement means that to bring a spouse from outside Europe to Britain, British citizens have to prove that they themselves earn upwards of £18,600 a year. However, for those who don't earn this amount, the policy can result in families being ripped apart. Our reporter Richard Tudor begins this film hearing from Fiona Harper, who's been affected.
I remember exactly where I was at the time. I was in the Morrison's car park with a 2-year-old in the trolley and a trolley full of shopping, and I get a phone call from my husband to say what it was that has happened, and that he's in Calais and is going to have to somehow find a bed for the night or something, and I just burst into tears.
Fiona's experience is the consequence of a controversial policy campaigners say forces British citizens to choose between career and family. Her American husband, Jerome, was separated from her for more than a year while she found work to prove she earned more than the minimum income requirement, at the same time as caring for their 2-year-old son.
And it was one of the most upsetting parts of it, where you realised that, you know, through perhaps our naivety of this process, that we had impacted him in that way.
And if Britain leaves the European Union, it will apply to 450 million more people. The minimum income requirement currently places an £18,600 earnings threshold on those who wish to bring a non-EEA spouse to the UK. This means 1 in 4 Londoners would be unable to sponsor a foreign partner. There's more than 1 million EU nationals living in London right now, and with 100,000 EU citizens moving to the UK for family reasons in the last 5 years, the extension to EEA citizens will affect Londoners more than any other region. Jane Golding's mother lives in Kingston upon Thames, but she's lived abroad for more than 20 years.
The issue is, you know, I might have to make a choice between caring for my mum and living with my husband. When I moved and when I married my husband, I had a legitimate expectation that I had certain rights under EU law and had certain rights to return to my own country. And those are retrospectively being removed.
As things currently stand, the main opposition parties want to abolish the minimum income requirement. But as the government seeks to extend the policy to 450 million more people in the wake of Brexit, campaigners say that it could tear even more families apart.
So there's growing consensus among political parties that this is just an unusually cruel policy that needs to be repealed or changed. There's also really massive public appetite for reform. The public want to see this reform to make it fairer.
We spoke to the Home Office, who provided the following statement.
We set a minimum income requirement for family migration to prevent burdens on the taxpayer and ensure families can integrate into our communities. The Supreme Court has endorsed our approach.
As the 31st of October looms, the minimum income requirement may soon affect more British citizens who hope to live in the UK with foreign partners. And for those who do not, or cannot prove that they earn the required amount, this may mean that they have to live apart.
That's Richard Tudor reporting there. Emma, it's of course distressing to hear these individual cases, but there's a lot of people will be sitting at home thinking, well, why should the taxpayer be subsidising people who come here, who perhaps their partners, they themselves aren't able to support them?
Well, I think it's absolutely heartbreaking. We have nearly 20,000 EU nationals in Kensington, and many of them have come over here to work and then want to bring their families over, and people's income goes up and down over the years. And as we heard, many people would want to come back and look after elderly parents and want to bring their partners over with them. I think it's incredibly cruel, and I'm sure Greg would agree, actually, that you should be able to fall in love with and marry whoever you wish. And, you know, I have a lot of Spanish family, and maybe I'd want to come over here, or they'd want to go over there, or, you know, maybe my third husband will be Spanish, who knows. But you know, as I say, income goes up and down, and the idea that suddenly because of this this potential breach at the end of October, if that happens, that families could be ripped apart, I think it's really, really cruel. And we have a lot of families who will be affected by this, because families don't always live together. Sometimes they come over, try and settle and bring their families over, and then in the future, then they earn. And actually, I think it's been proved that EU nationals contribute more to the taxpayer than they take.
They do hugely, they're net contributors. Greg, I mean, you have to have a pretty hard heart to look at some of these families where, you know, parents can't be with their children, families split up, to think that this was a fair policy and it's working in the right way and, oh, we should extend it to even more people.
Well, it's a balanced policy, and actually the figure of 18,600 is the one advised by the Migration Advisory Committee back in 2012 as being the right level. The Home Office statement there is correct, that we've got a balance between protecting the taxpayer and making sure that people can continue family life and have family life, and that is a balance. I think the balance is right. It's worth pointing out it doesn't affect any spouses of any EU nationals here at the moment. That is the first thing.
But potentially it will do, won't it?
If they were to get
October.
married in the future, it has that is all something for future migration policy. At the moment, of course, Labour is committed to abolishing all immigration control from their conference last week. They don't want to have any of this. They want to have complete free movement for everybody around the world, and that I think is an unacceptable policy. That's potential huge. That is potential huge cost for the taxpayer. We'd be the only country in the Western world to have such an open doors immigration policy. I think that's wrong.
Perhaps, but we are not talking about Labour policy right now. We're talking about the Conservative Party policy, and you are in government, and you're talking about this policy in a rather cold manner, and as we have seen, this affects real families, real people, and income, as Emma says, incomes do go up and down.
Look, I'm not talking about this in a cold manner. You know, my wife is German. This has intimate impact on my family as well. What I am saying, though, is that we need a balanced policy, and that this level is the right balance. In actual fact, the level would be a lot higher if it were purely assessed on overall cost to the taxpayer. That level would be around £25,000.
Some people would say that, you know, for a person like you, it isn't going to be a problem because you will, of course, be earning over that amount. So it's divisive between the rich and the poor. It's exactly. Poorer people from poorer parts of the world
and NHS workers
who are affected by this.
No, what it is saying is that people should not be able to bring in a spouse automatically unless they can show they can support that person in the UK when they arrive without being a burden on the UK taxpayer. That strikes me as being not harsh, that strikes me as being a fair policy on the overall UK taxpayer base, certainly compared to Labour's open door policy, which would just let everybody in.
OK, I'm sorry, Emma, we have to leave it there. We have to move on to something a little bit different now. The Brexit Party conducted the last of their on-the-road conferences this week when they pitched up in the capital. Their leader